Can separation anxiety in dogs be treated, or will your dog keep relapsing? And this is a question many dog parents ask themselves. So, your dog has been struggling with separation anxiety for some time, and progress either stalls or they relapse. And of course, you want a permanent solution so you can leave the house without them panicking. But it feels like you're just going around in circles, trying so many different things and nothing seems to work. And so it's not that you're not trying your best. I'm sure you are, because it's hard to cope and live with a dog that suffers from separation anxiety. So you are trying your best. But the problem is that the only way to prevent relapses from happening is to ensure that anxiety is fully solved, not simply managed. And very often we tend to think that if something is getting better, if you can manage a problem, then it's okay. But it's not okay, as we will see in this video. So you'll find out why separation anxiety can be solved, but only if you stick to a planned course of action until it is fully finalized. Please don't make the mistake of assuming that if your dog is better, if you can manage the situation, then you will just keep on managing it. You don't need any more professional help, or you don't need to carry on working with your dog. So let's look at some characteristics of anxiety to help you realize why it is so important to solve it the first time it hits. So anxiety disorders, and this includes separation anxiety, they fluctuate between periods of full-blown symptoms, like really intense symptoms, and mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. And so you need to be cautious when assuming that your dog is getting better. For example, let's say you're only 1 month into the plan, the behavior modification plan, and your dog has had 4 consecutive days of mild symptoms. And so, based on this, you assume that they're getting better. But this is not the case. 1 month into a behavior modification plan isn't much, really. And so those 4 days, those four consecutive days of mild symptoms don't necessarily mean that your dog is getting better, but it could just be a phase of mild symptoms. So a more realistic approach is to only assume that your dog is getting better if, number one, they have more and more consecutive days of mild or no symptoms, and this happens over a period of 3 months. It's reasonable to expect to see some kind of progress 3 months into a plan. So it helps to keep a simple daily record to help you track progress objectively. And this is because we tend to focus on the negative. It looks like our brain is wired to focus on the negative. And so what can happen here is your dog may have like 5 days in a row of hardly destroying anything, or barking and howling much less, or not house soiling at all. And then 1 day of like total destruction. And we're going to focus on that 1 day. Oh, they were doing so well, but, everything's gone down the drain because they had 1 day of terrible symptoms. So when you keep a record, it helps you track what's happening objectively. And you don't have to make it fancy, because I know that working with an anxious dog is overwhelming, and we don't want to overwhelm you even more. So what you can do is to actually have, like, let's say you have a calendar, like here on this photo, And you can have different colored pins. And let's say a red pin means that it was a really bad day. Um, a blue pin means that destruction or barking or howling were mild. And a green pin may mean, or you may use a green pin to signal that, okay, today was a good day. There was hardly any destruction or barking or howling or whatever. Okay, so this helps. It's simple. You just have to put a pin, and you don't actually have to start writing down a bunch of things. Now, what happens during this fluctuation between full-blown symptoms and mild to no symptoms is that anxiety can actually transform itself into another anxiety disorder. And so it's very important to avoid this, to ensure this doesn't happen with your dog. It's important that the plan or that you have them reassessed regularly to ensure that the plan is still right for your dog. This is really important because when you start working with a professional, they make that initial diagnosis, if it's a veterinary behaviorist or an assessment, if it's a dog behavior consultant. And so when you do that first assessment, usually it's when symptoms are really bad, because that's when we tend to reach out for help. And so the best thing is for that reassessment to be conducted by the same professional who assessed or diagnosed your dog the first time around. Okay. Now, you may also want the assessment to be conducted by a dog trainer, but then make sure that the trainer has formal education in dog behavior. Obedience trainers aren't automatically qualified to handle complex behavior problems. So, because the first assessment or diagnosis was conducted during a phase of full-blown symptoms, then it stands to reason that the reassessment should also be done during a period of full-blown symptoms. This is the most accurate way to determine if the problem is still separation anxiety or if it's something else. If the symptoms are completely different or very different, then the problem may be something else. So the professional that you're working with can check if your dog's symptoms are still consistent with the original problem. And if they are, then it means it's still separation anxiety. They are also the right people to adjust the plan according to the new symptoms if necessary. Okay, so why should you ensure to complete the program and have your dog reassessed regularly? Well, this is because the hard truth is that left untreated, an anxiety disorder will follow a chronic course with fluctuations between full-blown symptoms and mild ones, which means that it will never be fully solved because your dog will always be fluctuating between, oh, like total destruction and barking and constant howling and almost no symptoms at all. And then you think, okay, they're getting better, but then suddenly there's a relapse. Okay. So that's why it's very important to treat anxiety properly, solve it properly. And you can only do this with the help of a professional because you give your dog all the love and all the care, but you don't really have the knowledge to solve separation anxiety on your own because it's a mental disease. It's not like your dog is being naughty or acting revengeful or anything like that. So another reason why you need to solve the problem properly the first time around is that the persistence of mild symptoms is a strong predictor of a relapse. In other words, if your dog goes for about, let's say, 2 months where they hardly bark and howl when you're not there, but they still do. Okay, it's less, but they still do. Or they only destroy every now and then, which is much better than massive destruction every day. And so you may think, okay, like they're okay, they're much better. And this goes on for 2 months, these mild symptoms. And then suddenly your dog relapses. And so this is because if we maintain this mild symptom phase, then unfortunately your dog is very likely to relapse later on. And then the big problem with relapses is that there are studies that show that relapses tend to be more severe than when separation anxiety first developed. In other words, every time your dog has a relapse, the separation anxiety problem is going to be worse than the first time. And when they relapse for the third time, it's going to be worse than when they had separation anxiety the second time. And I'm not trying to make you panic. That's not the intention at all. But then it wouldn't be very ethical of me to be giving you this little presentation and not be totally honest and transparent with you, because we can't really sugarcoat separation anxiety. So just remember that better is never, never good enough. And manageable can lead to a relapse, which is obviously something that we don't want. Not only because your dog will be distressed like their entire life almost, but also, I mean, what about you? What about you being able to live a normal life again? What about you being able to go back to work without at the office without checking the surveillance camera all the time to see what your dog is up to? What about you saying, yes, okay, somebody invited us for dinner, let's go? So it's also, I would assume, it's also in your interest to solve it properly so that it's over and done with and no worries about relapses. And it's also important, very important, to get help right at the beginning. And this is because the longer separation anxiety lasts, the harder it is to treat, which means that the longer your dog is displaying all these separation anxiety symptoms without you getting professional help, then it's going to take longer to treat. It's going to be more difficult to treat. Not impossible, but more difficult. And so this is why working with a professional that you trust is the best way to solve separation anxiety. And this is because their assessment is spot on, because they are professionals, they have the formal education, they have the skills, they have the qualifications, and so their assessment is spot on. And this is something that doesn't happen when you look for help on social media or when you look for tips on the internet. And I know that it's part of the human condition. We always try to solve things ourselves before reaching out for help. But when it comes to separation anxiety, no single tip is going to solve the problem. I wish it would, but it doesn't work that way. You need a multi-layered approach, and you have to start with foundational work, and you have to build upon that foundational work, and you need to progress at your dog's pace. You can't force emotional independence. You can't force your dog feeling safe when you're not there. So a professional that you trust is the only person who can assess your dog properly and also regularly to ensure what I mentioned just now, that your dog's anxiety problem hasn't, in the meantime, transformed into something else. And of course, they can also ensure that the behavior modification plan is the best one for your dog. It's tailored to your dog. And that's why in the first consultation, a lot of questions are asked. And this is obviously to help the professional determine what is going to work best with your dog. For example, some dogs calm down if they have access to a window. They just entertain themselves watching the world go by. And other dogs can actually panic even more because they at the window always waiting for you to come back. So you can't really go with a one size fits all approach. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. It won't help to go with a one size fits all approach because the plan, in order for it to actually work faster, to be effective and work faster, every single thing that is done has to be specifically tailored to your dog. And then, of course, the professional that you work with is also the right person to make the necessary adjustments. Now, I know from over 21 years experience working with anxious dogs and their human parents, and you know that solving separation anxiety takes a lot of time, it takes effort, but the thing is you're already overwhelmed. You've probably tried so many things and you're feeling overwhelmed. You don't know what to do anymore. And so when the professional gives you the behavior modification plan, don't overwhelm yourself even more by trying to implement the entire program at once. Let's say that they say you have to be predictable, you have to ensure that your dog has fixed routines, you have to give them plenty of mental stimulation, you have to exercise them properly, not too much, not too little. You need to start working on departures. And it's true that you need to do all these things, but guess what's going to happen if you try to implement all of them at once? Something is going to fall to pieces somewhere down the line because it is too overwhelming for you. So it's important to implement one step at a time. And of course, it's very important to start with the foundation. Let's say the plan mentions all these things that I've just mentioned: mental stimulation, routine, predictability, departures. And you're not going to start with the most complex thing in your attempt to rush the process. You're not going to start with departures because that is going to set you up for failure. By the time you leave the house, your dog's panic has already been triggered. And so that will be a mistake. That is going to keep you going round in circles. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with the foundation. For example, you are going to work on predictability for 1 week. Like, this is all I'm going to focus on, just being predictable. Then let's say week 2 comes along. Okay, just going to focus on sticking to a fixed routine. At what time do I feed my dog? At what time do I walk them? Make sure that I don't switch the order around. Then the 3rd week, you're going to work on home departures before you actually start working on real departures. When you work on home departures, you can create barriers, physical barriers, by closing doors without your dog's anxiety or panic being triggered. Whereas if you start with real departures, by the time you open the door, their panic has already been triggered. So if you need more help, reach out to us at zencanines@gmail.com. We will be more than happy to help you. Take care.